Everyone laughed. A struggling single father stood outside his tiny workshop, staring at 6 broken electric motors. They were rusty, damaged, and looked completely worthless. Then the CEO of the largest company in town stopped by. She glanced at the motors, looked him up and down, and smirked. "You really think those pieces of junk are going to change your life?" The people around her burst into laughter. But the single dad didn't say a word. He quietly picked up the motors, walked into his workshop, and closed the door. What nobody knew was that those 6 broken motors were about to become the foundation of something extraordinary. While everyone else saw scrap metal, he saw an opportunity. Years later, the small workshop had grown into one of the fastest growing companies in the industry. Its value soared into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And one day, the very CEO who mocked him walked into his headquarters, waiting in the reception area for a meeting. What happened next left everyone speechless. The rain had been falling since sunrise. Inside a small garage on the edge of town, Daniel Carter wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around at the cluttered room that had become both his workplace and his second home. Tools hung from rusty hooks, half-finished repairs covered every workbench. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. In the corner sat 6 broken electric motors. Most people would have called them junk. Daniel knew why. 3 had burned out coils, 2 had cracked housings, 1 didn't even spin anymore. No customer wanted them. No repair shop would pay for them. And yet Daniel couldn't bring himself to throw them away. As a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter Emma alone, he had learned a simple lesson years ago. Sometimes the things everyone else gives up on still have value. The problem was that value didn't pay bills. Daniel glanced at a stack of overdue notices sitting on his desk. Rent, electricity, equipment payments. Every month felt harder than the last. Ever since his wife had passed away 4 years earlier, life had become a constant struggle. He worked 12-hour days repairing machinery for local businesses. Then he rushed home to help Emma with homework, cook dinner, and prepare for the next day. There was never enough time, and there was definitely never enough money. Still, every morning he got up and kept going, because giving up wasn't an option. Not when Emma depended on him. A sudden knock echoed through the garage. Daniel looked up. A delivery driver stepped inside holding a package. "Daniel Carter? That's me." The driver handed over a small box and left. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from the bank. His stomach tightened before he even finished reading. The loan extension he had requested had been denied. He closed his eyes. That had been his last chance. Without additional funding, he wasn't sure how much longer the shop could survive. For several moments, he simply stood there in silence. Then his phone rang. The screen showed Emma's school. His heart immediately jumped. "Hello, Mr. Carter, don't worry," the secretary said quickly. "Emma is fine. She just forgot her science project at home." Daniel let out a breath. "I'll bring it right away." 20 minutes later, he arrived at the school carrying the project. As he entered the hallway, he spotted Emma waiting near the office. Her face brightened instantly. "Dad!" She ran over and hugged him. Daniel smiled, despite everything weighing on his mind. "Forgot something?" She laughed nervously. "Maybe." He handed her the project. "You'll do great." "You always say that, because it's true." Emma studied his face. "Dad, are things okay?" Children noticed more than adults realized. Daniel forced a smile. "Everything's fine." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. "Okay." As Daniel turned to leave, Emma grabbed his hand. "When my project wins today, can we celebrate?" Daniel hesitated. His wallet contained less than $20, but he smiled. "Absolutely." Emma grinned. "Deal." Watching her run down the hallway reminded him why he kept fighting. No matter how difficult life became, he couldn't quit. Not now. Not ever. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by a large industrial auction. Local factories often sold damaged equipment there. Sometimes he found repairable parts at low prices. It wasn't glamorous, but it helped keep the business alive. The auction yard stretched across several acres. Forklifts moved equipment while buyers inspected machinery. Daniel walked through rows of discarded industrial components. Then something caught his attention: a pile of damaged motors. 6 of them, large commercial grade units, old but powerful. He crouched beside them. Most buyers had already ignored them. The tags listed serious mechanical failures. To everyone else, they were worthless. But Daniel noticed something unusual. All 6 shared the same design, and despite the damage, many internal components remained intact. An idea began forming in his mind. He spent nearly an hour inspecting them. The more he looked, the more excited he became. If he combined functioning parts from each motor, he might be able to create something entirely different, something far more efficient than existing models. It was a risky idea, maybe even a crazy one, but it was the first opportunity he'd seen in months. Thinking about buying those? A voice interrupted him. Daniel turned. Several businessmen stood nearby. One of them laughed. "Nobody wants those things." Another shook his head. "They've been sitting here for weeks." Daniel looked back at the motors. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was desperate. But sometimes desperation forced people to see possibilities others missed. When the auction began, bidding moved quickly. Machines sold. Equipment changed hands. Then the 6 motors appeared. The auctioneer barely finished describing them before silence filled the air. No bids, not one. Daniel raised his hand. The crowd looked surprised. The auctioneer nodded. Sold. A few people chuckled. One man actually clapped sarcastically. Daniel ignored them. After paying for the motors, he arranged transportation back to his workshop. As the truck pulled away from the auction yard, he stared at the equipment. For the first time in months, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long while: hope. He didn't know whether the idea would work. He didn't know whether the shop would survive. He didn't know whether he was making the biggest mistake of his life, but he knew one thing: those 6 broken motors were about to become the most important investment he had ever made. And somewhere across town, powerful people who had never heard of Daniel Carter were about to discover that the most dangerous competitor isn't always the biggest company. Sometimes it's a determined single father with nothing left to lose. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the workshop before sunrise. The 6 broken motors sat in the center of the garage like forgotten relics from another era. Most people would have seen a pile of scrap metal. Daniel saw a challenge, and challenges had a way of keeping him awake at night. He set a cup of coffee on the workbench and began taking the first motor apart. Bolts, wires, bearings, coils, piece by piece, he carefully disassembled the machine. By noon, the floor was covered with components. Some were completely useless, others were surprisingly intact. Daniel created separate piles, labeling each one with notes: good, repairable, replace, test again. The work was slow, but every hour revealed something new. By the end of the week, he had completely dismantled all 6 motors. What he discovered surprised him. Each motor contained a different type of failure, but none of them were beyond saving. More importantly, several design flaws appeared repeatedly. The manufacturers had been building these motors the same way for years. Nobody questioned the design because it worked well enough. Daniel wasn't interested in well enough. He wanted better. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, he spread blueprints across the kitchen table: pencils, calculators, pages of handwritten notes. The clock showed 1:30 a.m., but he barely noticed. An idea was beginning to take shape. Instead of rebuilding the motors exactly as they had been designed, he would redesign them entirely. The concept was simple: create a motor that used less energy, produced less heat, and lasted longer. Simple in theory, extremely difficult in practice. Yet the more calculations he completed, the more convinced he became. This could work. The next several months became a blur. Daniel worked on customer repairs during the day. At night, he worked on the prototype. Some nights he slept only 3 hours. Other nights he didn't sleep at all. Money became tighter than ever. Several customers delayed payments. Equipment repairs drained his savings. At one point, Daniel seriously considered giving up. Then came one of the hardest days of his life. The landlord arrived unexpectedly. "We need to talk." Daniel already knew what was coming. The overdue rent had reached a dangerous level. The landlord handed him a notice. "If the balance isn't paid within 30 days, I'll have no choice." Daniel stared at the paper. His chest felt heavy. The workshop wasn't just a business. It represented years of sacrifice, years of dreams, years of memories. Losing it would mean losing everything. That evening, he sat alone after Emma had fallen asleep. The notice rested on the desk beside him. For several minutes, he simply stared at it. Then he looked across the garage. The prototype sat under a protective cover. Hundreds of hours of work, countless sacrifices, every remaining dollar. Everything had gone into that machine. Slowly, Daniel stood. He walked over and removed the cover. The unfinished motor stared back at him. He smiled. "If we're going down," he whispered, "we're going down fighting." The following morning, he returned to work with renewed determination. 2 weeks later, the prototype was finally ready for testing. Daniel checked every connection twice, then 3 times. His hands trembled slightly as he connected the power source. Months of work had led to this moment. Either the motor would prove his theory, or everything would fall apart. He flipped the switch. For a second, nothing happened. Then the machine came to life. The motor spun smoothly, quietly, efficiently. The vibration levels were dramatically lower than expected. Daniel watched the performance monitor. His eyes widened. Energy consumption was far below traditional models, much lower, almost unbelievably lower. He quickly checked the numbers again, then again. The results remained the same. His redesigned system was working. And it was working better than he had imagined. A laugh escaped his mouth, then another. Soon he was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Months of pressure, months of fear, months of uncertainty. For the first time, something had finally gone right. That night, Daniel and Emma celebrated with pizza. Nothing expensive, nothing fancy, but to them it felt like a feast. Emma noticed his excitement immediately. "You look happy." Daniel smiled. "I think something good finally happened." Her eyes lit up. "Really? Really?" She raised her slice of pizza. "Then we should celebrate." Daniel laughed. "I agree." Across town, however, a much larger company was facing problems. Titan Dynamics had dominated the industrial motor market for years. Their products powered factories across the country. Their CEO, Victoria Kane, was known for her aggressive business style. Profits mattered, efficiency mattered, winning mattered. Everything else came second. That afternoon, Titan executives gathered for a quarterly review meeting. Sales reports covered the conference table. Most divisions were performing well, except one, the industrial motor division. Costs were increasing, customer complaints were rising, competition was slowly growing. Victoria studied the numbers. "We need innovation." Nobody spoke. "We've been selling variations of the same designs for years." Still silence. Victoria looked around the room. "Find solutions." The executives nodded nervously. None of them realized that a solution already existed. Not in a corporate laboratory, not inside a billion-dollar research facility, but inside a small, struggling garage on the edge of town. Over the next month, Daniel improved the prototype. Each test produced better results. Word slowly began spreading among local businesses. A factory owner agreed to test one unit, then another. The feedback shocked everyone. Energy costs dropped, maintenance expenses decreased, performance improved. Soon additional companies began calling. Daniel suddenly found himself busier than ever. For the first time in years, opportunity was knocking on his door. But success often attracts attention. And attention was about to bring him face to face with people who believed small businesses should stay small. One afternoon, an expensive black luxury car pulled into the workshop parking lot. Daniel looked through the window. Two people stepped out wearing designer suits. Neither looked like customers. As they approached the entrance, Daniel felt a strange sense of anticipation. Something important was about to happen. He just didn't know that this meeting would change the course of his life forever. Daniel wiped his hands on a shop towel as the two strangers entered the workshop. The man appeared to be in his 50s, wearing an expensive navy suit. The woman beside him carried a tablet and looked equally professional. Neither of them looked like they belonged in a small garage. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked. The man smiled politely. "Daniel Carter?" "That's right." The man extended his hand. "My name is Richard Benson. This is my assistant, Claire." Daniel shook his hand cautiously. "What brings you here?" Richard glanced around the workshop. "We've heard interesting things about your motor technology." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The news was spreading faster than he expected. "Who told you about it?" "A few factory owners." Daniel remained silent. Richard smiled again. "They're very impressed." Daniel nodded. "So am I." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Richard got straight to the point. "We'd like to buy your design." The words hung in the air. Daniel had imagined this moment many times, but hearing it aloud felt different. "What exactly are you offering?" Richard opened a folder. Inside was a proposal. Daniel scanned the numbers. His eyes widened. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. Enough to pay every debt. Enough to secure Emma's future. Enough to solve nearly every problem he faced. Claire leaned forward. "It's a generous offer." Daniel looked back at the documents. A year ago, he would have signed immediately. Maybe even 6 months ago. But something had changed. He wasn't just looking at money anymore. He was looking at possibility. "What happens after I sell?" Richard answered without hesitation. "The company owns the technology. And me. You can stay involved as a consultant." Daniel closed the folder. Something about the deal felt wrong. It wasn't the money. It was the idea of handing over years of sacrifice before seeing what the invention could truly become. "I appreciate the offer," Daniel said, "but I'm not interested." The smile disappeared from Claire's face. Richard looked genuinely surprised. "You haven't even negotiated." "I don't want to sell." Richard stared at him. "Do you understand how much money we're offering?" Daniel nodded. "I do. Then why refuse?" Daniel glanced around the workshop. "Because this wasn't just a product. It was proof that every struggle had meant something. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, it all lived inside that invention. I'm building something," Daniel said quietly, "and I'm not finished yet." Richard studied him for several moments. Finally, he stood. "Very few people walk away from opportunities like this." Daniel smiled. "Maybe." The businessman extended his hand again. "Good luck, Mr. Carter." After they left, Daniel sat alone in the office. The proposal remained on his desk. Part of him wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The amount offered could have changed his life overnight. But another part of him felt relieved. For the first time, he had chosen belief over fear, and that felt important. Over the following months, demand exploded. Factory owners continued recommending the motors to others. Satisfied customers became unpaid salespeople. Orders arrived faster than Daniel could fulfill them. The tiny workshop struggled to keep up. Eventually, he hired his first employee, then a second, then 3 more. The company that barely survived rent payments was suddenly growing. Not everyone celebrated. Several large manufacturers noticed what was happening. Among them was Titan Dynamics. Inside the company's executive headquarters, Victoria Kane sat at the head of a conference table, reviewing market reports. Her expression darkened with every page. "What exactly am I looking at?" An executive cleared his throat. "A new competitor." Victoria frowned. "Competitor?" "Yes." She flipped through more reports. The name appeared repeatedly. Carter Industrial Solutions. Customer satisfaction ratings were exceptional. Energy savings were outperforming industry standards. New contracts were increasing every quarter. Victoria looked up. Who owns this company? A man named Daniel Carter. The room became silent. Victoria leaned back in her chair. A garage owner? Former garage owner? Former? The executive nodded. He recently expanded into a larger production facility. Victoria wasn't amused. Titan Dynamics generated billions in revenue. The idea that a small business could threaten them seemed ridiculous. Yet the numbers told a different story. Factories were switching suppliers, customers were paying attention, investors were asking questions, and Daniel Carter's name kept appearing. Victoria tossed the report onto the table. Set up a meeting. With Carter? Immediately. Several days later, Daniel received an invitation. Titan Dynamics wanted to discuss a potential partnership. The invitation alone shocked him. For years he had admired companies like Titan from a distance. Now they wanted to meet him. The meeting took place inside Titan's massive headquarters. The building towered over downtown. Glass walls reflected sunlight across the city skyline. Everything about the place screamed power. As Daniel entered the lobby, employees rushed through marble hallways carrying laptops and reports. A receptionist escorted him upstairs. Minutes later, he entered an executive conference room. Victoria Kane was already waiting. She looked exactly like her reputation suggested. Confident, sharp, intimidating. She didn't waste time with introductions. So you're Daniel Carter. Daniel nodded. And you're Victoria Kane. She folded her arms. I've reviewed your products. And they're impressive. Coming from her, it almost sounded like a compliment. Almost. Victoria continued. But let's be realistic. Daniel remained silent. She leaned forward. You've had a good run. A strange smile appeared on her face. But companies like yours don't survive long. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because success requires resources. She gestured toward the city outside the window. Manufacturing, distribution, logistics, capital. Her eyes locked onto his. Things that Titan Dynamics already owns. Daniel understood exactly what she was doing. She wasn't offering a partnership. She was delivering a warning. Victoria slid a document across the table. Sell now. Daniel didn't touch it. The answer is still no. For the first time, irritation flashed across her face. You should think carefully. Daniel stood. So should you. Victoria's expression hardened. You believe you've built something special. Daniel smiled slightly. I know I have. Then he walked out. Behind him, Victoria Kane watched the door close. And for the first time in years, she felt something she rarely experienced: concern. Because despite her confidence, Daniel Carter wasn't backing down, and his company was growing faster than anyone had predicted. The battle between the single father and one of the most powerful CEOs in the industry had officially begun. The meeting with Victoria Kane should have intimidated Daniel. Instead, it motivated him. As he drove home from Titan Dynamics headquarters, he kept thinking about her words. Companies like yours don't survive long. Maybe she was right. Maybe the odds were against him. But Daniel had spent most of his life proving people wrong, and he wasn't about to stop now. Over the next 3 years, Carter Industrial Solutions expanded faster than anyone expected. The small workshop became a modern manufacturing company. New engineers joined the team, new factories opened, new customers signed contracts across the country. Every success brought new challenges, but Daniel welcomed them. Unlike many executives, he never forgot where he came from. He still walked through production floors. He still spoke directly with employees. And every evening, no matter how busy he became, he made time for Emma. Now a teenager, she had witnessed every step of the journey. She remembered the tiny garage, the overdue bills, the nights when her father worked until sunrise. She understood something many people didn't. The company wasn't built by luck. It was built by sacrifice. One afternoon, Daniel stood inside the headquarters of his growing company, looking through a wall of glass overlooking the city. His chief financial officer entered carrying a report. "You should see this." Daniel took the document. As he scanned the numbers, he froze. Then he read them again. Revenue had reached record levels. New international contracts had been finalized. Investors were lining up. And according to independent market analysts, the company's valuation had officially crossed $600 million. For a moment, Daniel simply stared at the page. $600 million. The number felt unreal. Years earlier, he had worried about paying rent. Now he owned one of the fastest growing industrial companies in the world. The CFO smiled. "You did it." Daniel slowly shook his head. "No." The executive looked confused. Daniel glanced at a framed photograph sitting on his desk. It showed a younger Emma standing inside the old garage. "We did it." A few months later, major business publications began covering the company's success story. Investors called it one of the greatest entrepreneurial achievements of the decade. Business schools studied Daniel's strategy. Industry experts praised his innovation. And every article repeated the same remarkable detail. The company had started with 6 broken motors everyone else considered worthless. Ironically, the attention created serious problems for Titan Dynamics. Customers continued leaving. Investors questioned leadership decisions. Market share declined. For the first time in years, Titan wasn't the undisputed leader anymore. One morning, Daniel's assistant entered his office. "You have a visitor." Daniel looked up from his desk. "Who is it?" The assistant hesitated. Then she smiled slightly. "I think you'll want to see this." A few minutes later, Daniel walked into the executive reception area. Several employees stood nearby, pretending not to watch. Seated in the waiting area was Victoria Kane, the CEO who once dismissed him, the CEO who warned him, the CEO who believed his company wouldn't survive. For a brief moment, neither person spoke. Then Victoria stood. Time had changed both of them, but Daniel noticed something different. The confidence she once carried so effortlessly seemed diminished. "Daniel, it's been a while." Victoria nodded. "It has." Daniel gestured toward a conference room. "Let's talk." Inside, they sat across from each other. The situation felt strangely familiar. Years earlier, Daniel had sat in her office. Now the roles were reversed. Victoria took a deep breath. Titan Dynamics wants to discuss a merger. Daniel remained silent. She continued. "We believe combining our resources could benefit both companies." Daniel couldn't help remembering the warning she had given him years ago. "Companies like yours don't survive long." The memory almost made him smile. Victoria noticed his expression. "I know what you're thinking. Do you?" She nodded slowly. "I underestimated you." The admission surprised him. Victoria Kane wasn't known for admitting mistakes, yet here she was. For several moments, silence filled the room. Finally, Victoria looked directly at him. "When we first met, I saw a small business owner." Daniel listened quietly. "I didn't see the determination behind him." Her voice softened. "And I definitely didn't see what he would become." Daniel looked through the glass wall overlooking the company he had built. The engineers, the workers, the managers, the dream. All of it had started with 6 broken motors and a father who refused to quit. Eventually, he turned back toward Victoria. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "When everyone saw junk, I saw potential." Victoria nodded. "I know." Daniel smiled. "And that's exactly why we're here today." The meeting lasted several hours. In the end, they reached an agreement, not because Titan Dynamics rescued Carter Industrial Solutions, but because both companies now stood as equals. As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "There is something I've wanted to ask." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What?" She smiled. "Why didn't you quit?" Daniel thought about the question. The answer wasn't complicated. It never had been. He thought about Emma, the garage, the sleepless nights, the unpaid bills, the broken motors. Then he smiled. "Because my daughter was watching." Victoria nodded slowly. For the first time, she truly understood. After she left, Daniel stood alone in his office. The sun was setting beyond the city skyline. A golden light filled the room. His phone buzzed. A message from Emma. Dinner tonight? Daniel laughed. Some things never changed. He typed a quick reply. Wouldn't miss it. Then he looked once more at the photograph from the old garage. 6 broken motors, countless obstacles, one impossible dream, and a lesson he would never forget. The world often judges value by appearance. But sometimes the things people laugh at today become the things they admire tomorrow.